I received a reply to my last video, which I thought I'd share with you because it's very appropriate. It's from KeramanBub8799, and although I was planning on addressing all of the issues he raises in future videos, it's probably better to address them up front. So thanks for the comment, KeramanBub8799. And what he said was this: be warned, there are hidden costs. Housing prices in Japan depreciate. You will need Japanese. The process is not quick, and you have to be accepted by the local community. Plus there are ongoing costs and taxes. It is doable, but it is not all roses. The subsidies are only for Japanese citizens or nationals. And finally, try to get a bank account in Japan as a foreigner. You can't. Firstly, I don't want to give the impression that getting a house in Japan is all rainbows and unicorns. It's not. It can be a frustrating process. Unfortunately, there are people out there who are pushing this vision of getting a house in Japan to make out that these houses are falling out of the trees and you can just go and pick one up and it's no problem at all. Well, that's not really the case. And you can see from these videos, there are free houses in Japan. Absolutely. You can get a free house in Japan. Free in terms of the house itself and the land that it's on being given to you for free, but there are always costs or conditions involved. And you have to be aware of that. And one of the issues might be that the house is a wreck. So keep that in mind. Another thing you should be aware of with those free houses is that if the property value is above 1.1 million as determined by the government, then there will be a tax on it, a gift tax. So be aware of that. This is just to give you an example of a free home site for Japan. This is Zero Estate, and you can get on here and they'll show you a number of houses that are free. That is no cost up front. And as you can see, this house doesn't look too bad, and it's in Nagano City. Nagano is very nice. Probably needs a few repairs. And if you get down here, you'll see it says the asking price, 0 yen, free transfer. But then you go down a bit further and you find that it was built in 1935, so it's fairly old. And here's the trick: fixed asset tax assessment. 6,537,406 yen for the land and 217,934 yen for the building. So that's a total of about, well, let's say 6,700,000 yen. And so that's basically $67,000. So with gift taxes and other taxes, you could be up for as much as $20,000 perhaps. So if the taxes are going to cost you something like $20,000, you might be better off just getting an Akiya somewhere else that you can move straight into for the same price. You have to weigh up whether that's worth it. It's probably in a good position in Nagano, but that's a lot of money for a free house, it seems to me. And then when you get down to the bottom here, you see that it says, please note that even if property price is 0 yen, there are cases where the actual cost is not 0 yen because registration fees and taxes are required for acquisition. Now that's the warning that all these places should have. And if you go to this section of Zero Estate, it will explain to you what costs are actually involved, which is very handy. And that will give you a better idea of the reality of getting a free home in Japan. Free houses aren't necessarily free. There's always some costs involved. And now finally, we'll have a look at the 7 points that were raised by one of our viewers that I mentioned earlier in this video, starting with depreciation. Yes, that's very true, hence the cheap cost of the Akiya. They are generally not an investment for wealth potential unless you manage to rent them out as an Airbnb or a hotel. A hotel license is called minpaku. But as the lifestyle choice, does depreciation really matter? I think not, if you plan this to be your forever home. And even if down the track you decide to leave Japan or you decide to sell the place, if you've renovated it, you're going to get your money back, I would say.
As long as you're not in a dying village somewhere.
But it's not an investment in terms of like a Western house investment where the property prices are always going up.
But you also won't be oppressed by a mortgage that will keep you down all of your life.
Number 2, you will need Japanese. Although it would be possible to buy an Akiya without Japanese, it would also be very difficult. You can get lucky and find a real estate agent or a local council person who can speak English well, but it is rare. Which is why using a go-between is probably the best bet for most people. I would have found it much more difficult and frustrating if my wife wasn't Japanese. I think I would have muddled through eventually, but not without a lot of heartache. So I recommend using an English-speaking broker. And in my next video, I'll be interviewing one of those people. And another thing you can use is Google Translate. It's pretty good, but really more of a last resort. It's useful when you're stuck and you don't have the vocabulary to ask certain questions. And I found it quite useful. It's also great when you're walking through supermarkets and you don't know what it is in a packet, and you can just point it at the actual wording and it will translate it for you.
Hello, I'd like to buy an abandoned home.
こんにちは。空き家を購入したいと考えています。
外人さん、私たちの土地を取らないでください。
Foreigners, please don't take our land.
Oh,
It's pretty handy. So I recommend that you download it. It's free from either Google Play or the Apple App Store.
many municipalities have free Japanese lessons run by volunteers. They're a great way to learn the language and make new friendships. There are also online lessons that you can take before you come here.
You have to be accepted by the local community. Well, this is true to some degree if you're buying in the countryside. You might get on with the owner of the house when you're planning on buying, and he's happy to sell you the house. And the local council, acting as a go-between, might welcome you with open arms. But then you might just be vetoed by the local community group because they don't think your Japanese is good enough and they think you'll have trouble fitting in. It does happen, but plenty of people manage it, so I don't think it's the issue that some people think it is.
The other side of the coin is that if you are accepted into the community, they will often ask you to volunteer and get involved in their activities. And this can lead to meaningful friendships, the banishment of loneliness, and a lot of fun, like here in this mochi making ceremony that I attended not long ago.
That was fun. The process is not quick. The purchase process takes up to about 3 months normally from the moment an offer has been made and accepted, and assuming the buyer requires a structural inspection and is residing overseas. Now, it can take less without the need for inspection and if the buyer is residing or present in Japan. and can take longer if there's some complications on the seller's side. For instance, say they need to finalise inheritance matters. And also you get slow, unmotivated sellers and listing agents because they don't really make a lot of money out of selling Akiyas anyway. And yes, there are ongoing costs and taxes. And I have suggested in past videos that you allow an extra 10 to 15% on top of the purchase price. To give you an example, the following are what you might expect from buying a, say, $20,000 Akiya. That's $20,000 Australian, or 2 million yen. And these are just estimates and can vary considerably since the government's valuation on the property may be much higher than what you pay for it. So you have registration tax, property acquisition tax, fixed asset tax, city planning tax, stamp duty, and if you go through a real estate agent, their fee is likely to be around, say, $1,400. Sometimes I've seen up to $3,500, but that's more for condos. So in this example, you're looking at around $3,500 or 17% on top of the purchase price, but it will vary. I don't think it really generally gets that high, but it could, but generally 10 to 15% is what you'd be looking at. And also be aware of any back taxes that might be owing. That's sometimes an issue. Unless you're living in a villa where you have maintenance fees and all kinds of other stuff, the fixed asset tax is an annual tax levied on the owner of the property on January the 1st of each year. And that's for, a freestanding house, a detached home, an Akiya. The rate is 1.4% of the assessed value of the property. And that value is reassessed every 3 years, which can lead to changes in the tax amount. Subsidies. The subsidies are only for Japanese citizens. Well, this is not exactly the case. Foreigners can get the subsidies as well, which are used to offset renovations, for instance. But there may be conditions such as living in the house for a certain number of years, or preference might be given to young families with children. And it's true that most subsidies are not available to non-residents, but some particular municipal government departments are a bit more lenient, and you can potentially convince them to allow the subsidies to be given to you. And it also might depend on the case officer's discretion. But the thing with these subsidies is that if you come here to live, then you would be a resident, so the subsidies apply. Some people actually buy these Akiyas at a distance, haven't even seen them and buy them from, say, America or wherever. So they're not a resident, so the subsidies are not applicable to them. And finally, you can't get a bank account in Japan. Well, that's true, again, if you are not a resident. A foreigner can open a bank account in Japan. You will need to provide certain documents such as a residence card, passport, a personal seal, and proof of address. It's all doable. Japan is a bureaucracy. It takes time. But once you're a resident or you have a residence card, it seems that you can open a bank account. I'm going to look into that a bit more because I haven't got my bank account yet because I'm still waiting on my visa application as a spouse visa to go through. Once that's done, I should be able to get a bank account. But before then, I'm going to check to see whether I can get it just based on the fact that after 3 months, you have to get a residence card anyway in Japan. So that's what I'll be looking at next. As much as I love cities like Tokyo and Osaka, which are two of the safest cities in the world, and also very interesting, I understand that a lot of people prefer the countryside, basically because they want some peace and quiet. And I feel that way too. So today we're heading inland to look at a cottage or a cabin
out in the woods and see if that suits our purposes. On the way, we came across this statue, which should have been probably a bit of a tourist attraction, but the place is a bit run down and hard to get to from the town. It sits above the town of Usami on the Izu Peninsula, and it's the largest sitting Kannon statue in Japan. Kannon is the Buddha of compassion and mercy. The next place, which is way up in the countryside, inland a bit. It's quite nice with the wood. Once you moved everything out. How safe is this? It looks like it's all being held up by bars. In the end, even though this place was only about 30,000 Australian dollars, which is about 20,000 US, it was very isolated. It was way out in the boonies, about an hour drive from a town, and lovely place, lots of wood, had a great deck, except the deck was all rotted away and held up by scaffolding. So it was going to take some major repair work to fix that or replace it. The other thing was, again, the issue with the car. You'd need a car to get around. The infrastructure in that area, it was a villa area, and the infrastructure in that area was very limited as far as villas go. There didn't seem to be really anything much there. It was just a bunch of isolated houses dotted around this forest area. Now, it would have been great if you wanted peace and quiet, and if you were, say, a writer and you were writing a novel, then fantastic. It was beautiful area, lots of forest, birds, very peaceful, but just really didn't cut it, even though it was very cheap and quite a nice place. And you also would have noticed that there was a lot of clutter inside. Now, the problem with clutter is that it costs an awful lot of money to remove junk in Japan. That place, I would say at least maybe $5,000 if they weren't going to clear it themselves. What will often happen is that the owner will agree to clear out all of their belongings before you take possession. But a lot of the time, the place is just used as a storage unit for all their junk from years ago, and it's up to you to get rid of it because they don't care about it anymore. And that's where the extra costs come in. So you're probably looking $2,000 to $5,000 depending on how much junk there is, and that's an added cost for you. Next video, we'll be looking at condominiums and apartments, and I will be interviewing a buyer's agent, Ziv Nakajima Magan, who can make the process of buying Japanese real estate a lot easier. He's from Nippon Tradings International. In the meantime, here's a Japanese food you will either love or hate. Till next time. I decided to try a new food each video that I haven't tried before, and I thought we'd start with natto, which is a bit of a delicacy or kind of exotic, I suppose, in Japan. It's fermented soybeans, and it comes with a little sauce sachet. It's not to everyone's taste. People tend to either love it or hate it. I actually like it. Now, I have had it before, but I thought I'd start with this because it's one of those things that you'll come across whenever you go to a buffet at a hotel. It'll be one of the options you can have. Maybe it's an acquired taste. It's got a fairly strong flavour to it. You add it to rice and you can mix other things in with it. But, you know, I think it's quite interesting, and supposedly it's good for you, but I don't know how true that is. But it comes with mustard, which I don't like. So here's me eating natto. You can see it's got these strands on it. It's like eating spider webs and spider eggs or something. I don't know, alien food. But I used to eat it on its own, but now I mix it with rice because that's the way you're supposed to do it. I didn't know. But anyway, here we go. I wouldn't eat it on the first date. Anyway, I think it's pretty good. You'd be the judge. Try it when you get to Japan.